Okay, so we're going to get started this morning with exercise 117. A little bit different format for the next series of, or the next module of the class. I'm going to not do the big front-end lecture. We're going to go mostly into demo, and I'm going to show you how software works. We're moving, yet again, in software. The class moves fast. We're going to move into AutoCAD. It is not possible for me to teach you everything you need to know in AutoCAD in 2.5 to 3 weeks. That's just the fact. There's nothing I can do about that. How many people have already worked in AutoCAD before? Okay. For those of you that have worked in AutoCAD, this will be a breeze. Though I will tell you that I hope that I have a few tips up my sleeve that you haven't thought of that you might get out of this. For those of you that have never been in AutoCAD, that's why we're doing this quick introduction. I will talk through AutoCAD. We will practice AutoCAD. We will actually draw some floor plans and some elevations. And then we'll spend some time with the post-processing part and how do you get good quality drawings out of AutoCAD. And I think that's one of the areas where a true AutoCAD class tends to be deficient, is they spend a bunch of time teaching you how to draw in AutoCAD, and they spend almost no time in what's called paper space and creating layouts and exporting layouts and that kind of thing. So I will spend some time working through layouts and having you guys experience that part of it. We will also take our AutoCAD drawings, we'll make an export of them as a PDF, and ultimately bring it into Illustrator and do some collage work over the top of it. So there is a workflow that flows back into Illustrator, and I'll walk you guys through that once we get there. So even for those of you that feel like, oh, I've got AutoCAD down, no problem, there's still a few things that I think you can pick up on in this little module of the class. So it's a little awkward today because we start AutoCAD and then you guys go on spring break and you forget everything I talked about for a week. And that's a good thing. You're in college, you should have a spring break like that. And then we'll come back and we'll continue. So we'll pick up where we left off. I did this obviously so that you guys could turn in your assignment 104 before you went away on spring break, so it's not hanging over your head. So that's why we end up with this kind of floating day in advance. So today we're going to take it real slow. For those of you that have worked in AutoCAD, this is a bit of a snooze and you'll breeze through it quickly. Spend the time, once you're done with the exercise, working on other class stuff. I promise you at this point you must have other stuff that you can work on. So spend your time. Don't just waste it and check Facebook or whatever it is you guys do these days. So we're gonna actually start in AutoCAD, and I want to kind of walk through AutoCAD. There are several versions of AutoCAD that are available on the school computers. The way the licensing works here at DVC, we get the most current version of AutoCAD and all of the Autodesk products. Those are installed on the machines, which means we have a variety of options there. Autodesk is the maker of AutoCAD. They also make programs like Revit or Fusion 360 or 3D Studio Max. So they have a variety of products in their wheelhouse. Today we're going to work with the most basic of all of those, which is AutoCAD. There are 4 icons for AutoCAD on the desktop here. The one we're going to be picking from is the plain AutoCAD 2019 English. So nothing fancy. There is a special AutoCAD for architecture. It was kind of the step before Revit, so to speak, in the AutoCAD development process. We're going to be working with AutoCAD 2019 English. Nothing fancy, no special architectural desktop, nothing to worry about, just plain basic AutoCAD. I think it's important to point out why I'm talking about AutoCAD in the first place. And that is that AutoCAD is still, even though Revit exists and some of the other software programs exist, AutoCAD is still the backbone of most of the design process. Somehow they've managed to get a foothold that is so strong that I don't think it's ever going to break. Even though a lot of the larger firms are starting to move in the direction of Revit, in my experience, and I don't have statistics to really quote for you, but I would guess that probably 60 to 70% of the architectural drawings that are done in AutoCAD, and then maybe 20% are done in Revit, and then 2% are done in like Vectorworks or something like that. So I will definitely say that I'm not a big fan of Vectorworks. That's very far down on my list. But that is another drawing program that's available. The thing that's great about AutoCAD is it's very, very universal. And generally speaking, no matter what firm you're in, even if you're working in Revit, there's going to be points where you're going to talk to some engineer and he's going to want AutoCAD drawings for it. or you're going to need to send something to somebody and it'll end up being an AutoCAD. It's just kind of one of those universal designed formats that most people need to be familiar with. And so I think it's important to introduce it this early in your careers. One other side note, if you start to feel really comfortable in AutoCAD, Rhino, which is the other class that I teach, that's Archie 136, which of course I would love to see all of you in, for those of you that aren't in it right now. If you feel comfortable in AutoCAD, Rhino works really closely to AutoCAD. So if you know AutoCAD, you know Rhino. If you know Rhino, you know AutoCAD. So that's a nice thing. So I've gone ahead and I've opened up that basic AutoCAD 2019 software. This is what we're going to be working with. When you first open it up, this is what you're going to see. And we need to go ahead and start with a brand new drawing. At the very top of our window here, right next to the A, the red A, there's a kind of a blank page looking icon. You'll click on that and that will create a brand new AutoCAD. Now, there are a variety of templates that are available within AutoCAD. We're sticking with the default AutoCAD, nothing fancy here. So it's AutoCAD. I'll go ahead and say open. And it will open up a brand new AutoCAD file for me. The file's named Drawing 1. That's what we're going to be working with. So a couple things about AutoCAD. One of the hallmarks of AutoCAD is that the screen backdrop in AutoCAD is always black. And the reason that Autodesk chose to make this goes way back when. I actually learned AutoCAD in probably about 1997 or so. It was AutoCAD R12. It was before AutoCAD 2000 came out. Actually, it was R11, I think, release 11 of AutoCAD. And this still was the same in that day and age. It was still a black background. And the reason that they do a black background is because people that tend to draft in AutoCAD spend an inordinate amount of time staring at the computer screen. And when you stare at a computer screen that long, if you're staring at white, it's much harder on your eyes than if you stare at black. So AutoCAD converted to a black background very early on with white lines. Makes it a little bit easier to see, and so that's why it's still that way today. So a couple things about our AutoCAD drawing. The first thing that we need to do as we start to set up our AutoCAD drawing is to confirm what the units are. And we'll do that in just a second. But I think it's important to also go through what's kind of going on the AutoCAD page, because this looks distinctly different than any of the Adobe products. This looks different than the Illustrator that we were just looking at. It looks different than Photoshop. And so it's set up a little bit differently. So AutoCAD is set up with a series of what they call ribbons on the top of AutoCAD. And each of these ribbons, if we're right now looking at the Home ribbon, contains groups of tools that are most commonly used. So in the Home ribbon here, this first group are our standard drawings, like a line or a polyline or a circle. The more frequently the tools are drawn or used, the bigger the icons are. The smaller the icons, the less frequently they're used. And then underneath this draw section, there's also a drop down with a bunch of even smaller little icons as we go down in the hierarchy. So most common thing is a line or a polyline. Those are the two biggest tools. As we move over in the Home ribbon, we get to the Modify section. These are all things like moving, copying, rotating of objects, etc. We get over into the Annotation. These are for dimensions. We're not going to cover dimensions at all in this class. There's no expectation that you learn dimensions. We won't talk about it. So we'll skip over that. The next thing is all about layers, set up a little bit differently than an Illustrator layer would be set up, but there is layers nonetheless, and we can control those layers through the Layers section here. Blocks, we'll touch on blocks in a couple, probably 3 weeks from now because of spring break. So we'll come back to that section. There is Properties. This is things like color or thickness of lines, those kinds of things that are available in there. And then we kind of trickle off into groups and utilities and whatever. There are other little ribbons that are available. So for example, I could go to the Insert ribbon, and it's going to give me a bunch of tools relating to Insert. Or I could go to the Annotate ribbon. We're not doing annotations, but if I did, I would get a whole bunch of information about that. So these are just ways of kind of flipping through the most common sets of tools. Below that, we have our tab, which is the actual drawing we're working on. It's called Drawing 1 right now by default. The drawing space is this piece that's available in black. That's what we're going to be drawing on. On the right side here, there's kind of a compass set up, and you can see that in the center of this little box it says top. AutoCAD does have the ability to work in 3 dimensions, though if I'm being honest, it's really awful in 3 dimensions, and you're far better off moving into something like Rhino if you're going to work in 3 dimensions. So we're going to stick in the top view. We're not going to worry about the other views so much, but that is how you would control what view you're looking in. Down here at the bottom of the page, we have something, this little white bar that goes across the bottom here. That's called the command line. And this command line is actually a way of interacting with the software that's a little bit different than the Adobe products. In this command line, we can actually type in commands rather than picking a button. And the people that are more proficient in AutoCAD, the people that are faster working in AutoCAD, they know a lot of the commands or the keyboard shortcuts to be able to move faster, and they use the command line quite a lot. In the very beginning, most of you will be hunting, if we wanted to do a rectangle, you'll go find the rectangle tool and click on it, as opposed to starting to type rectangle and going from there. So it's just an option. So for example, if I wanted rectangle, I would start typing rectangle, and there it would be rectangle right there, and I can insert the rectangle command. So it's just another way of kind of interacting with the program itself. Below that, we have some tabs. We're in what's called model space right now. I'll talk a lot about model space and paper space down the road. So don't worry about it right now. We'll stick in model space. That's fine. On the right side over here are a bunch of little toggles. These are drawing tools that help us to draw, that we could turn on and turn off, things like snaps. And we'll cover those a little bit. Before we get too far into this, though, I am going to ask that you turn something off temporarily today, because it will help me to explain how AutoCAD works. So I want you to click in the very bottom right corner. There's 3 lines. I want you to click on those 3 lines, and I want you to put a check mark next to the dynamic input. It's right there. And that's going to allow the toggle for dynamic input to show up. So you click on those 3 lines. There should be a check mark next to dynamic input. Once you're done with that, you can click on the 3 lines again. That pop-up menu will go away. And I want you to come over here, and it's it's about the 4th button over. It looks like a little plus sign with a rectangle below it. I want you to uncheck that so it's not highlighted in blue anymore. And so we're turning that off. Typically, you'll leave it on, and so you don't need to go through this. But it helps with my early explanation of AutoCAD and how AutoCAD works to have it turned off for a while. So we're just doing that temporarily. OK. So now it's time to actually start drawing in AutoCAD. But before I really get into drawing, I need to make sure that I have my units set correctly. So AutoCAD works a little bit different than other drawing programs. We're not thinking about the size of paper anymore. We're thinking about the full size of an object. So if I were drawing, I don't know, a computer or a desk, I would draw the desk at 3.5 feet by 26 inches. I would draw everything at full size. If I'm drawing a room, it would be 40 feet by 20 feet. I would actually draw everything full size. That's a big difference from many of the other drawing programs. So setting your units correct matters. For our purposes, we're going to be working in feet and inches. Our default unit we want to be inches. So to change that, I'm going to go ahead and type. Again, this is going to be on the command line at the bottom. I'm going to type in units. You can see it come in there, units. And I'll go ahead and press Enter on the keyboard after I've typed in units. And that will bring up this Drawing Units dialog box. And you can see right now our length units are set in decimals. We're going to change that to be in architectural. That means it's going to be in feet and inches. So our length is going to be set to architectural. Our angles are still going to be decimal degrees. We still want to be able to rotate 30 degrees, for example. And once we have that set up, we'll go ahead and say OK. So our units will be set in architectural. And now that our units are set in architectural, we can draw in feet and in inches. By the way, I will also point out on the handouts and on the course website here, anytime that I talk about typing something into the command line, I try to make sure it's highlighted in a different font. So you can see here, this is like a typewriter font. And so, of course, I said type units, but I've also highlighted the font so that you'll be able to see that it's different. Same thing happens on your little handouts on the page. It should be in a different font. Yeah, Brooke?
How do you undo a command that you can because I would use Alt or
Just hit Escape. Escape in AutoCAD, the universal take me out of wherever I am is hitting escape. And you'll find that you end up hitting escape lots of times. And even sometimes you'll hit it like 3 or 4 times in a row, just like escape, 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 escape. You know, get me out of there. That's your way of getting out of anything that you don't like. So I have units set. And now I'm going to go ahead and start my drawing. So AutoCAD is set up very much like your algebra math teacher would set up graphs, if you remember back to those days. You would set up things on a coordinate system. So you could actually calculate out where a line was based on a couple of points. And AutoCAD is set up very much the same way. We have an origin, which is point 0, 0. And it's right where the red line and the green line intersect. I've zoomed out just a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. I think when you first open the page, it's down in the corner, like that. I'm just putting it over here to help the illustration a little bit. So we have an x direction and we have a y direction. So things from 0, 0 going this way on the x direction would be positive. Going that way would be negative. On the y direction, this would be positive, and this would be negative. So when we talk about coordinates, this point is 0, 0. If I had a point that was 1 foot, comma, 0, it would be over by 1 foot on the x direction and nothing in the y direction. So it's always x first, then y. So for example, if I wanted to draw a line that was 24 feet long that started right here at 0, 0 and was 24 feet straight up, I would start using either the Polyline or the line tool. I would start my line at 0, 0, and I can actually type in that value. So I'll type 0, comma 0 followed by enter. And you can see that that's starting right at that point. I should point out before I draw this that if you come over here and you say, OK, well, I've moved my mouse there, and that's right at 0, 0. As soon as you zoom in, you'll see that, well, wait a minute, it's not quite there. So you zoom in a little bit more and you say, OK, well, this time I'm going to get it right. I'm going to be real careful and I'm going to make sure I'm right at that point. Well, then you zoom in and you'll see that, wait, it's still not there. So in AutoCAD, precision matters. So we want to make sure that we type in that value. So I'm going to start at 0, 0. Here's my line. I'll type in 0, comma 0 and press enter. That means no matter how far I zoom in, it's always going to be right at 0, 0. So then my next line, I want it to be going up along this y-axis right there, and I want it to be 24 feet long. So I can go ahead and type in the coordinate for the end point of that line. And that end point would be 0 in the x direction, so I type in 0, comma, and then I wanted it to be 24 feet long, so I'll type 24, and I need to differentiate between feet and inches in this case. So I'm going to type in 24 and then use the apostrophe sign to represent feet. So I'll type 24 apostrophe right there, and I'll go ahead and press enter. And when I do that, it's going to draw a line that's 24 feet long. I'll press enter one more time to finish that line. And then I'll zoom out, and we can see there's my line, and it's 24 feet long, going right up the x direction. If I wanted to continue from this point, or I could continue using a polyline instead. Polyline is just a continuous set of lines, so you can keep going, so to speak, as opposed to one line segment. It doesn't matter, we'll join them together afterwards. So whether you use polylines or lines, it doesn't make any difference. So if I wanted to continue on, we have the same problem here. So if I were trying to get right on top of the end of that line without my snaps on, I would just get close to it, but I wouldn't be exactly on the point. And this is where AutoCAD has something called Object Snap. And you'll see that it's on by default. So as I move my mouse toward the end of that line that I just drew, I get that little green square that shows up. That green square means snap to the end of that line. So I'll go ahead and click on it. That snaps to the end of that line. And it's time to type in the next coordinate. So if I wanted a line that went over by 12 feet, and it's up 24 feet from the along the y-axis, I would type in 12 feet, comma 24 feet. That would be the coordinate over here that I wanted to get to. So I type 12 feet, comma 24 feet, and I'll press enter. And that gives me a line that is 12 feet long right there. So the thing about it is this involves quite a lot of thinking. The next line that I want to do would be down 6 feet. So I'd have to calculate out, I'd have to say, okay, well, the next coordinate would be 12 feet, and then 24 minus 6, that would be 18. So it would be 12 feet, comma, 18 feet. But it takes a lot of math. And so AutoCAD has the ability to do something a little bit different. So instead of using an absolute coordinate, which is relative to the origin, relative to 0, 0, we can instead use something called a relative coordinate. And a relative coordinate is based on the last click I made, go this direction. So it's resetting the origin, so to speak, at the last click that I made. So a relative coordinate is relative to that point that I just clicked. I want to go down by 6 feet. So I'm going to do that by typing the @ sign in front of my coordinate. So I'm going to say relative to the last point by typing the @ sign. This is like the email @ sign. So relative to that point, I want to go down 6 feet. So I'm not going anything in the x direction. So it would be at 0, comma. I want to go down 6, so it would be -6 feet. So -6 apostrophe. And I'll go ahead and press enter. So rather than having to calculate out that this is 12 feet, comma 18 feet, I can just say relative to the last point, @ sign, 0 in the x, -6 in the y, enter. So if I wanted to come over here and I wanted to go over 12 feet from this last point, this would be at, so relative to that last point, 12 feet in the x, positive x, comma 0 in the y. And I'd press enter. So frequently, the relative coordinate is extremely useful as you try to start to figure this stuff out. Because rather than calculating it out from the origin, it lets you calculate it from the last point that you created. So if I wanted to go down 12 feet here, it would be at 0, comma, -12 feet. And then I'd press enter on the keyboard. There it is. The nice thing is that I can switch back and forth. So this point would be in relative coordinates, it would be at -12, comma 0. Or in absolute coordinates, it would be 12 feet, comma 6 feet. So I could flip back over and say this is 12 feet, comma 6 feet, and that would get me to the same place. So I can flip back and forth. I'm not stuck in either one. This last one, I could say this is at 0, comma -6 feet, and that creates that. When I'm done, I'm going to come back to that origin point. I'll snap to my original line, and I'll press enter. And that then drew out this shape. So if you were drawing, let's say I was drawing not starting at the origin. Let's say I was drawing over here, floating in space, where I don't know where my origin is. I would be stuck using relative coordinates. So in this case, it would be at 0, comma 24 feet. And this would be at 12 feet, comma, 12 feet, comma 0. And this would be at 0, comma -6 feet, at 12 feet, comma 0, at 0, comma -12 feet, at -12 feet, comma 0, at 0, comma -6 feet, and then right back to there. So in that case, I was able to draw this not knowing where the origin was by just using all those relative coordinates next to the next to the next. So relatively easy. This is important for you to understand as a basis or an underlying understanding of how AutoCAD works. Is it the way we draw everything? No. We frequently don't use this at all. I'm going to show you the way that we use it, and that's why I had you turn dynamic input off. But if you understand that this is an underlying place, you might need to draw the slope of a roof at a 6 and 12, for example. Well, it's much harder to calculate out what that would be, but I could use my relative coordinates. If I wanted it on an angle, I could say I want it to be at 12 feet, comma 6 feet, and I'll get that exact slope that I want. So there are times in the drawing process where you want to be able to use those coordinates. So knowing what they are and how they work is an important thing to understand. So I've gone ahead and I've drawn this shape. We're going to start to make this shape into a little bit more of a floor plan. That floor plan is available on the back of your handout. It's also on the course website. I have it opened here. Those of you that have taken 136, it looks awfully familiar, right? And for those of you that are going to take 136 next semester, which hopefully is all of you, this will look awfully familiar. It's still a really good way of kind of understanding how the programs work so that you're familiar with it. So I'm going to come back and I'll spend a little bit more time with this, but I want to talk more about this drawing and the coordinate system before we move into that. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn back on dynamic input. So remember, it was that button down here at the bottom that had a plus sign and then a filled in little rectangle. I'll turn that back on. Most of the time, this will be on by default in AutoCAD. And what this allows me to do is, as I start drawing, you notice that instead of just having a cursor, there it is with it off, when dynamic input turned on, next to my cursor, I have the ability to specify a start point, and it's giving me information right there. So I could start right here, for example, and then as I start to go in one direction, do you see how I get kind of a dimension line on one side and a text value that I can type in? As soon as I see that value, I can just type in a distance. I could type in 24 feet, and then I would have a line that's 24 feet. Then I can point in this direction, and I can say, you know what, I want a line that's 12 feet. And I want a line that's 6 feet. So all I'm doing is pointing in the direction and then typing in the value or the length of that line. This is much, much faster than doing any coordinate calculations. Notice also that I have a length, but I also have a degree. You see the degree sign? If I want to switch to the degree, let's say I want to have a line that's at 30 degrees, I can press the Tab key on the keyboard, and I'll switch, and I can type in 30, and then I can press Tab again, and it locks at 30 degrees, and I can specify a length. So I could say 12 feet. And it's going to draw a line at 12 feet. Well, that's not supposed to do it that way. It was at 30 degrees. It just was a little long. So those mistakes happen, right? I must have typed it in wrong. Anyway, so the point is that you can use this to your advantage once that dynamic input is turned on. Apparently, I can't draw anymore. Try that one more time. 24 feet. And then I could do 12 feet, 6 feet, 12 feet, 12 feet, 12 feet, 6 feet, and then I can finish it that way. So that's a much faster way of drawing this particular shape with the dynamic input on. But I like, as an illustration, to have it turned off so that you understand that there's a coordinate system underneath what it is that you're drawing. OK, so I'm going to go ahead and delete this one. And we'll come back to my original one, which is right here. And it's time to start to create the thickness of the walls. So if we look at the drawing right here, we have our walls. Our walls are 6 inches thick. I need to be able to draw that thickness. So we'll jump back over into AutoCAD. And I'm going to use the Offset tool to create this. And so the Offset tool is available in the Modify ribbon right here. And it's this tool right here. It looks like a C. This icon actually changed in AutoCAD 2019. It looked a little different in 2018. So we're going to go ahead and click on the Offset tool right here. Remember, the alternate would be to type in Offset into my command line. Either way will get you there. And when I'm doing the offset, I'm going to read what the text says next to my cursor, or I'm going to read what's going on in the command line. They usually repeat each other. And it says specify offset distance, or, and then there's a little downward arrow. We just are going to specify the offset distance. We know it needs to be 6 inches, so I'm going to type in 6, and then I'll put the quotation mark in. I don't have to type in the quotation mark because it's assumed to be inches, so I could just type in 6. For me personally, I've gotten in the habit of always specifying inches or feet so that I'm never going to get messed up. So I've typed in 6 inches. I'll go ahead and press Enter. Then it says Select Object to Offset. So this is the object that I want to offset. I'm going to click on the line that I want to offset. So I could click on this line, for example, and I can choose which side of the line I want it to offset to. I want it to offset to the inside. And then I could come to the next point and I could offset it like that. I could come to this one and I could offset it. Now, if I wanted to offset all of them at once, I could join all of these lines together first and then offset them. So rather than having the overlap at the corner, see how those two would overlap? Rather than having that, if I were to join all of these together, and I'll do that by using the join tool, it should be available in here somewhere. I always type join, so I'm not quite sure where it is. It's the opposite of explode. Well, I'll tell you what. How about we just type in join? Which one is it? Where's the arrows coming together? That one? Join. There we go. I just didn't recognize the icon. OK, so join. It says select source objects or multiple objects to join at once. So I want to select all of these objects. I'm going to click and draw a box around. It's a single click here and a single click on the opposite end. I've selected all of my objects. I'll go ahead and press enter. That will make all of these one object. So if I were to click on it, you can see that it's highlighted the whole object. Now when I go to the offset tool, there it is, the offset. I need to specify my distance. It would be 6 inches. I'll specify my curve. And you see how those corners don't overlap anymore. It automatically adjusts like that. So I now have the inner and the outer walls set up. It's time to start drawing in the openings to those. And so I'm going to zoom in at the top here, and I'm using just the scroll wheel to zoom in. We'll do it like that. And I need to draw in the door. And so the door at the top here, if I look at the image, is a 3-foot door, and it's centered on this wall. So I know that it's a 3-foot door. I know that it's centered on this wall. The easiest thing to do would be to use the line tool and to snap to the middle of this line. Well, I don't know where the middle is. I could measure it and calculate it out. I know that this is 12 feet, so it would be 6 feet over, and I could do it that way. But the alternate to that would be to turn on my midpoint snap. So snap to the middle of a line. And I can do that by coming down to my object snaps. It's a box with a little tiny box in the corner. If I click on the triangle, it's going to show all of my snaps. I'm going to turn on my midpoint object snap right there. And with the midpoint object snap selected, when I go to the middle, I'm going to get a little triangle in the middle. And my cursor will say midpoint. That means it's going to snap to that middle of the line. So I'll snap right there to the middle of the line. There's one. Now I'll come down to the line below it. I'll snap again. And now I'm done. I'll press enter. And that gives me a line right in the middle of this wall. So one more time. I'll use my line tool. My midpoint snap is on. I'll come down here. And when I get to the midpoint, I'll get that triangle. I'll come down here. I'll get the triangle there. And I'll press enter to finish. Yeah?
Where'd you get to the midpoint?
So the midpoint, I know it's hard. It's behind everybody's heads. There's an icon. It's this icon right here. It looks like a square with a little square in the corner. And there's a downward arrow. If you click on the downward arrow next to it, it'll bring up your object snaps, and you're going to check for midpoint. OK, so now that I have that midpoint, I'm going to use that offset command again. I know that my door is 3 feet, so it would be half of 3 feet. I can do that as 1'6". I could do that as 18 inches. It doesn't matter. I just need to divide it in 2. So I'm going to do offset. There's my offset button. Specify offset distance. This would be 18 inches. Or I could type in 1'6" quotation mark for 1'6". Either way. I'll press enter. And I'm going to offset this line to this side. And I'll offset this line to that side. And that gives me the 2 sides of the door. Now that I'm done, I'll press enter again. There we go. And now I need to actually cut open this opening. And so I'm going to do that using the trim command. And this is a command that you will quickly learn that you really wish was in Illustrator. So trim works really nicely because essentially if a line passes another line or intersects another line, we can choose to get rid of part of the line segment. And so if I click on trim or type trim into the command line, it's going to say select objects or select all. So I need to select the objects that I'm going to use to do the cutting and the objects that I'm going to use to do the trimming. And so I need to select those objects and these objects. I can click on them individually, or I can select in two different ways. And I think this is a good point to talk about selections in AutoCAD. There's two different ways to select objects in AutoCAD, and they're highlighted a little bit differently. There's a select where you initiate the select from your left going to your right. And when you do that, the selection is going to be any object that is completely contained within the blue rectangle that you're creating. So from left to right, it is completely contained within the object. So in this case, if I started here and I went this direction, only those three lines that are completely contained would be selected. It's not going to select these larger lines because they're not completely contained. If I select from the right side to the left side, and it doesn't matter whether it's bottom or top, it's just right and left. If I select from the right side to the left side, notice my rectangle is green this time, and it's anything that the selection touches. So in this scenario, when I make the selection, it's going to select the lines of the walls and the three lines. So it's just a different way of selecting. So left to right is blue, and it's only objects completely contained within the selection. Right to left is green, and it's all objects touched by the selection. So it's two different ways of selecting. OK, so we're going to go back to that trim command. And I'm going to select from right to left and select everything. There. When I'm done, I'll press Enter. And then it says Select Object to Trim. If I hover over a section, you see that I'm going to, when I hover over, it gets rid of that section and gives me a little X. I have to click on the line, and then that section will go away. I'll hover over this section, and there it is. It's previewing it for me. I'll hover over this section, and I'll hover over that section. It won't let me get rid of this. You see when I hover over this line, it gives me the little null sign. When that happens, it's because this isn't actually trimmable. There's nothing to trim on it. I'm going to have to delete it. So I've gone ahead and I've trimmed the opening for the door. I'm going to press Enter on the keyboard to finish. And then I'll go ahead and select this one last line and press the Delete key on the keyboard. I could also, if I didn't want to press the Delete key on the keyboard, I could type Erase and press Enter. Either way. It's interchangeable. So I've gone ahead and I've cut in my door opening. There's my door opening. These two are separate from the curves, the walls. I could join them back together. So I could take my Join tool right there, Join, and I could select from right to left the wall lines and these two cut lines that I just created, press Enter, and then those become one continuous line again. You don't have to do that, but it's kind of good practice to go ahead and go through those. So that's the first door that I created. And if we flip over to my drawing, there's the door that I created. Now it's time to draw in these windows. It's a 2-foot window. It's 1 foot from the doorway, and it's 1'6" from the corner of the building. So I need to go ahead and draw that in. It's going to show up right here. I have to double check something because AutoCAD has a little glitch, and I'm not sure whether they fixed it in 2019. So bear with me for just a second. OK, it looks like they did fix it in 2019. If you're using one of the older versions, there's a glitch, and this won't work unless you dock the command line. Don't ask why. But anyway, it looks like it's going to work. So when it comes to placing this window, remember I said it's 1'6" from this corner over, and it's 1 foot from this corner over. Typically, people will go ahead and just draw a line, and they say, OK, that's great. I'll go over 1'6", and then I'll come down to right there. I'll press Enter. All right, I've got that line. And then I can do the same thing. Start here. We'll draw over by 1 foot, Oops, sorry, my mouse moved. 1 foot, and then we'll come down. Great, I have my window. The problem here is that you have lines on top of other lines. So I have my line of my wall, but then I also have this other line that's on top of it. And you guys, when you see this on the screen, it's not a big deal. But when you go to print it, it can be a big deal. It can make the lines darker. It can interfere with snapping later. It can interfere certainly when you export this and build it in Rhino. So it's good practice not to have those extra lines. So instead of drawing this with those extra lines, we're going to use something that's built into AutoCAD that can control where the line is going to start. It's the equivalent of smart tracking in Rhino. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and move our mouse right over this corner. And you see that I get the little snap, the endpoint snap rectangle. I will then move my mouse. I haven't clicked at all. I'll move my mouse in this direction. And you see how the cursor says extension followed by a number. And I get a little dotted green line there. At this point, I can actually type in how far I want to go from that point. So I want to go over by 1 foot 6 inches. Sorry, 1 foot 6 inches. There we go. And as soon as I press enter, my line is actually going to start 1 foot 6 from that first point. And then I can come down and snap to perpendicular right there. And then my next line, I'll go back to the line tool. I could start either at this point and go over by 2 feet and then go down, or I could start at this corner and go over by 1 foot. The advantage here is that the only line that I created are these little window lines. I don't have a line that goes on top of my existing line. So I'm going to do that again on the other side just for practice here. I'm going to move my mouse over this corner. I haven't clicked. I'll then move my mouse to the left. I'll get the green dotted line, and I'll type in 1 foot 6 inches. Enter. And then I'll draw the line that goes down. I'll go back to my line tool. I'll move my mouse over that corner. I'll move my mouse to the right this time and type in 1 foot. And I'll draw that line there as well. So this is something that's important for you guys to get practice doing today. And if you're struggling to make it work, I'll come and I'll sit with you and we'll make sure that you have a good understanding of how this works, because it will help your drawing flow quite a bit. So I want to designate that these are windows. I'll do that by just drawing a line that goes across where those windows are. I'll do the same thing on this one. I'll draw a line across where those windows are. And I press enter to finish. That gives me those 2 windows on either side. So there is a lot more flair to the drawing that's on the back of this page, or certainly, well, actually you can't see it so much because the copy didn't turn out so well. But if you looked at it here, there's a lot of extra little garbage. Don't worry about that. That's all line weight and style. You guys don't have to worry about that for your purposes. We're just trying to create the bulk of this drawing. So as I continue, you'll see that there's more windows that have been established. Some of those windows are mirrors of each other. So in this case, I've already drawn this window right there. I would like that window to show up right down here on this side. I could draw it again, certainly. I could come down here and I could start here and go over 1 foot 6, or etc. But it's a little bit faster to take this window and to mirror it down to this side. And I can do that by using the mirror command. It's right here, mirror. If I click on that, it will ask me to select objects. Now remember, in this scenario, I want to select from left to right, so I'm only selecting the window. Because if I selected from right to left, I would select everything, and I don't want that. So it's going to be from left to right, select only the window. I'll press enter. And my mirror line, if I snap to the middle of this wall, right there, that will then create a mirror line. AutoCAD always asks, do you want to erase the first objects? Yes or no? No is the right answer in this scenario because I want to keep my window there. That gives me this window at the bottom, which matches up with that window right there. So I have that window. I'd like to take this window and make a copy of it next to it. couple things about this. One, of course, I could just draw the next window. There's nothing wrong with drawing another window. It just saves time if you copy the existing window over and over. So in this scenario, I'm going to select my window again. And again, that's a selection from left to right to select only the window. I'm going to use the copy tool right here, copy. And my command line is saying specify base point. Well, that's the point that I'm going to copy from. And now typically what people do when they copy an object is they snap to the object itself and they say, OK, great. Now I have a copy of the object and I can put it somewhere. But I would encourage you instead to think about that point that you're picking a little bit more carefully. So if I go back to copy again, here it is, specify base point. Well, if I picked a point that was 6 inches from this point in this direction, so I'm going to use that tracking again, where I go over by 6 inches, typed in 6 inches, I now have a point that is 6 inches from where my window starts, which will allow me to snap really conveniently right to there and get a window that's 6 inches from the first window, like that. And actually, I could keep going. I could create more windows going along here that were all 6 inches apart. So I'm controlling where that point, where that copy was from. So one more time, there to there. I'll go to copy. When it says specify base point, instead of picking the object itself, like that corner, I'm going to go over by 6 inches. Sorry. My mouse cord is pulling my mouse when I let go of it. And I'll type 6 inches. And there it is, 6 inches from that point, which will allow me to snap to right there. So it's a different strategy. Yeah?
Can you mirror it again?
Yeah. So I'll do the mirror on this side, even though it's not the correct window. Okay? So I'll mirror this one down to the bottom over here. So I'm going to select mirror. It's going to say select objects. I'll go from left to right to select the objects. I'll go ahead and press enter. Then it says specify first point of mirror line. I need to snap to a line that's in the middle right here. So I'll snap to right there. Remember, my midpoint is already checked as my object snap. And then I'll draw a line, and it's just mirroring across that line. Erase objects, no. And there it is down there. I'll delete that because I don't have it there. OK, so I also have, if we go back and look at my drawing here, I have some windows at the corners. So I have windows on this wall. They're also 1'6" from the outside wall. There's a window right there. I could very easily come in and draw my window. I could say, OK, this is 1'6". And then, oops. And then I could draw it again. It's a 2-foot window, so we come up here 2 feet. And then there's the middle of the window, like that. Sure, that's fine. But I could do this in even fewer steps from efficiency standpoint. Mirrors don't have to work horizontal and vertical. If you guys took 130, is it 130? It's 130, where you had those reflecting lines when you were trying to find the lines in space and you would reflect across the lines. You guys vaguely remember that, maybe. I can do the same thing. If I put a mirror that's on a 45 here, I can take this window, I can mirror it across this 45 there and there, and it's going to show up on the upper wall. It's a trick. So there's nothing wrong if that's too confusing. Don't worry about it. Just draw it. But if you're kind of picking up on AutoCAD and you feel comfortable in it, doing that kind of a mirror can save a lot of time. So I can do that again right here. I can select this object. I can go to mirror, and I can mirror across that 45, which is going to give me a window there. Same thing. I'll select my objects, go to mirror, and we'll mirror across that 45. And that gives me this line right there. So there's a few more windows in here. There's windows in this part of the building. There is also a line or a wall that goes from here to here and from here to here. That's going to involve some trimming. So I'd go back to trim. I'd select all of these objects, press enter, and then I'd get rid of that and that and that, and that. And that's creating that wall. Then there's a door through here. At this point, you have the tools you need to finish this drawing. So I'm not going to do the rest of the drawing. I'm going to leave that up to you. If the drawing on the back here is missing dimensions, you can make it up. Remember, it's not about being perfect on this drawing. This is just a sample for you to base your drawing on. Okay? We're going to work through it. When you're done today, we need to make this a JPEG for you to be able to actually see it. And this is the kind of thing that ends up being confusing because long term you're not going to make JPEGs out of AutoCAD. You're going to make PDFs because you're going to be printing them or you're going to be taking them into Illustrator. So JPEG's a little weird, but we need a way of basically showing or proving that you did it. You can do it in two ways. You can use a screen capture tool to print the screen and give me a screenshot of what you worked on. Or you can actually print it or plot it, as AutoCAD calls it. I'll show you both options. And if you get a little bit lost, when you're ready to turn it in today, let me know and I'll come around and I'll help you to do one of these. The printing option, if I click on the printer icon up here at the top, I'm going to, under the printer and plotter name, I'll scroll all the way down here and I'm going to pick Publish to Web JPEG as the printer. We can use the default paper size. And it's always a good idea when we do that. I have it set to plot the display. I can hit this preview button and we'll see if it actually shows up. Okay, there it is. It's not the most attractive thing in the world, but it does show up on my drawing. That's nice. There we go. And so let me center the plot. That might make it look a little bit better. Let me preview it. Yeah, there you go. At least it's centered. And then I could say OK, and it's going to ask me where I want to save it. That's one option. The other option would be to do a screen capture of this. There's something in Windows called the snipping tool. If I do a little search here for snipping tool, there it is. I can create a new snip and drag a box around my drawing, and that then creates this. I can then save it using this little save snip and put it on my flash drive. Either one of those is fine. I just need proof that you worked on it today. That's the point. So if you get a little bit lost in that part, I'm not overly worried about you learning how to do a screenshot. I just need proof that you were here and you worked on it for the purposes of today. So I want you to keep working your way through. We will come back and we're not going to work on this particular floor plan again, but we will then, after spring break, you'll come in and you will work on a new floor plan. So you'll get some redundancy. I'll talk you through some of the new some new strategies, some new tools, and that sort of thing. Are there any questions? Okay, I will float around and I'll help all of you, especially for those of you that have never worked in AutoCAD before. I know it's a little bit overwhelming. Don't worry, you'll be fine. I'll walk you through it. But there's your basic introduction to AutoCAD. So I'll turn you guys loose. Make sure you make a post by the end of class today. Have a fantastic spring break. Enjoy your week off. You've worked hard. You deserve it. I will enjoy my week off too. And we'll reconvene after spring break.